Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Just getting this whole thing started.
Looks like you're still at the office.
Yes, when they start at 5, I always have to decide if I'll go home or do it from here. Hey, Tim.
Hi there.
Hi, Tim. How are you?
Good. How are you?
All right, thanks.
Good. Has the big freeze descended on Norwalk yet?
Well, it was cool today. I think the big freeze is coming tomorrow.
Yeah,
How is it? Are you up in Boston?
I'm up in Boston. Yeah, I'm checking now. It's 27 now. It's gonna drop to 10 degrees by 8 a.m.
And tomorrow the range is 12 to 23.
Okay,
So
not
that
too
is
far
cool.
off. Yeah, it's cool. It's a little bit on the cool side.
So as of tomorrow, we no longer have a zoning commission. And then Wednesday, we have a new planning and zoning commission. So be dealing with a whole group of new players on the planning side and a whole group of new players on the zoning side. Should be interesting.
There's a lot of transition happening in the municipalities we're doing consulting for, turnover in a lot of cities with counselors. And so just keep our heads down.
Well,
Us technical people, like
what's happened here is the common council has decided to merge the two commissions into one.
Hi, everybody.
Evening, Tammy. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you all?
Good, thanks.
Good.
Hey, Steve.
Do we have
Laura,
any
we could
knowledge?
probably pause the recording for a minute till we start.
I just started the recording. Zoe, if you want to take it from here.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So we've got a bunch of stuff to sort of share with you today. The main thing that, has evolved since last time is sort of moving beyond, just kind of taking stock of what's there and starting to speculate about what could be there. So you should be seeing the sort of first slide here. For our agenda today, the bulk of it is sort of the continued scenarios workshop from last time. I do want to introduce a new team member of ours, Gabriel Ramos, who's joining us here and has been helping me kind of behind the scenes to get things ready for today. And for the meeting today, we're going to start with just kind of sharing a little bit about the public feedback that we've gotten so far. I know that the last time we still had the social pinpoint map sort of open for comment to the public. So we've now closed that and sort of summarized a little bit of what we saw in that map. And Gabriel's helped us to do that. And then additionally, we'll kind of share with you how we're starting to break down the analysis from last time and thinking about what could happen on these parcels. For a couple of them, we've done development test fits. So we'll sort of share those preliminary ideas with you guys for feedback. And then we'll sort of conclude by just talking a little bit about the upcoming public meeting and some of the ways that we're gonna try and reach out and get feedback from the public in this next phase. So kind of a packed agenda, so I'm going to jump right in. So for today, kind of as you know, we're kind of coming up on the public meeting. The main thing here is just we want to share with you the land use scenarios that we've started to come up with and discuss the public feedback. So thus far, there were two ways people could provide public feedback. One was sort of the digital version of the map, and we also had the sort of physical version, which was up at a couple places. We ended up with 158 comments from 56 unique stakeholders. So each person who was commenting was making multiple comments. And this is kind of a typical spread that we see. A lot of people come to just check in and see what other people are saying, kind of take the pulse of the project. And then there's sort of some people that come with a lot that they're sort of eager to share, and they'll make multiple comments. So there's kind of a range of how people engage with these kind of activities. And broadly, what we saw in sort of looking at all of those comments on the sort of both the digital and the physical versions of the map is that people had a lot to say about public access and open space. That was the main thing that the sort of comments on the map revolved around. And then sort of secondarily, there was sort of a fair amount of comments that were relating to sort of infrastructure, resiliency, some sort of environmental kind of green infrastructure type ideas, as well as sort of multimodal connectivity. And then finally, the fewest comments were about specifically land use and zoning questions. So that's kind of a, just to frame for us as we go out to the public, we can kind of expect that a lot of the conversation will revolve around public access, open space, and sort of green infrastructure questions, including water quality and impervious surfaces and all that. So for the main sort of bulk of today, just as a refresher, we're kind of going to go through the land use scenarios, and ultimately that'll kind of, we'll select along with the public kind of a preferred scenario going forward and sort of detail out all of these different elements of what that will mean for the final plan. We're going to sort of skip over the Moreau for now, but that's still, all of that content is still up there if you guys want to return to it from the last workshop. So this is just sort of a reminder that it's there for you to explore. The existing character areas, this is again what we went over last time. This is sort of how we landed with these different kind of sub areas within our study area that each have in their current role, they each have a different kind of character, both visually and in terms of the sort of the built form, in terms of the street network, in terms of how they're sort of what land uses are taking place on them already. And from there, what we've done since is sort of distill those into 5 sort of larger areas, each of which has kind of a central sort of question that we're sort of exploring with you guys. So I'm going to walk you through each of them, but sort of the broader Marina District, which sort of centers around what you'd imagine, the marine commercial, but also sort of extends across the river and includes a bit of the Washington Street area to sort of think about the relationships there. The next one, which sort of centers around Oyster Shell Park and sort of the connection to Washington Street. The next one, which is really focused around the sort of heavy industrial West Bank going into sort of the CBD, how that transition happens. And then the East Bank sort of wrapping around Wall Street through to kind of where the sort of the built fabric transitions here around the I-95 bridge. And then finally, the sort of mini Marina District almost that sort of flanks either side of the I-95 bridge. So those are the 5 kind of areas that we're going to look at together. And just as sort of a reminder, this is the zoning that we're starting with. And we're sort of thinking about how to line that, as we look forward, lining up our recommendations for this plan with the framework that came out of the industrial zone study. So these sort of this refined, distilled spectrum from more intensive to less intensive industrial uses. So we're thinking about how to map that on to the waterfront uses. So this is sort of the context that we're expecting. And then kind of going into the individual ones, starting with the Marina District, our central question for this one, and we would welcome your feedback on whether sort of there are other questions that we should be asking here, is really how can we use land use policy to better create an amenity-rich, broader Marina District experience that is greater than the sum of its parts? How do we connect water-dependent commercial uses to the Washington Street corridor amenities? So it's really about kind of that, connecting the anchor of the Marina District into the broader context and thinking about what that sort of spillover effect is and how to sort of incentivize that relationship. Before I kind of jump in, any thoughts on that kind of framing question for this? Does that feel like the right kind of starting point?
I think one thing, Zoe, this is Tim, is that the scenarios that we're going to show you aren't recommendations. They're just a kind of initial test fit to get a handle on the dimensions of things, maybe what's possible. So we expect feedback and probably adjustments and new scenarios will come out of our conversation tonight.
Can I just jump in? I see that one of the participants joining from the public has their hand raised. And I just wanted to flag that since this is a steering committee meeting, we'll run the meeting as usual, and then we'll have room for the public comment at the end.
Just if that was Diana, Diana's taking minutes for us, so maybe she had a
Oh,
question.
okay.
Okay, so I will jump into the next. So just to kind of frame for this particular sort of character area cluster around the Marina District, some of the public input that we got, there was an interest in connecting adjacent parks with boardwalk or trail. There was an interest in maintaining water dependent uses and encouraging boatyards and aquaculture uses. And also a note on sort of the need for dredging. And then you can see here some of the alignments for the multi-use paths that sort of we understand based on our coordination with the redevelopment authority, kind of what's coming to the area and the sort of expected alignments there.
Has anybody talked to Tim, Bob Kunkel? Do you know? Because he's got a marine use and he's running produce and different products with an electric vehicle, well, boat, back and forth between Connecticut and Long Island.
Yeah, we have tried to reach out to him. I want to say maybe 3+ times we've attempted to have a meeting, and he's definitely been interested, but we just haven't been able to connect. I think he might be really busy,
Yeah.
but I agree that he would be a cool perspective to have on this study.
Yeah, because he's gotten a couple of $1 million from the federal government. And I think he's in queue to get several more million, whether from the Connecticut or a combination of Connecticut federal. He wants to put more boats online.
The money, John, was primarily to build the new design of a vessel that he was planning, that lithium batteried transporter, that he had.
Right, but
I'm surprised we haven't heard much from him because, as I said, he was kind of interested in pursuing this a lot further than where he's been right now. I haven't heard hide nor hair from him myself.
Yeah, because he has interest in expanding and he needs larger facilities. Right now, he's sharing some space with the Blooms.
Well, you'd think that he would, take a little bit of an initiative and reach out as well.
Right. Well, you would think, yes.
He might just be pretty busy. That sometimes is all it takes. So we'll keep at it, and hopefully we'll connect.
Well, being pretty busy and having a grant from the federal government for over $1 million. I mean, I think that says something, that there's something in the works. So
yeah, so he's certainly doing something right.
I don't think he's going to let that lay fallow. Let me put it that way.
Yes,
Yeah, and we, John Pinto, you told us about this earlier in the process, and others have mentioned it. So we're aware of it. We just haven't had a chance to connect with him directly.
Okay. I mean, should we reach out to him? I mean, we can certainly reach out to him. I have no problem. Or John.
Yeah, if you're open to sending him my way, we've connected on the phone a few times, and then I followed up via email and didn't hear back about like actually setting the meeting time. But he was totally open to speaking with us when we were on the phone. So I think it's just
the reason why I think that's important, because this would be a definite plus, because if Norwalk can remain on the well, let me put it this way, on the agenda of the federal government to maintain a clean and open harbor for dredging, that if we're part of National Marine Highways, area, that would certainly have an impact on what we could do, perhaps as far as further dredging is concerned.
Absolutely. We'll keep at it. Yeah. And I think if you want to kind of see if you can connect with him and sort of encourage him to set up a time to talk with us. We'd love to hear more.
Yeah, we'll do that. I'll try doing that later on.
Great. So to kind of jump into some of the specifics here, just as a refresher, this area is a mixture of, the current zoning is a mixture of C residence right at the edge. Marine commercial is the heart of it. We have the Washington Street Design District sort of in this corner here. And then when you go across the river, the park is zoned as AAA residence. And then we have a pocket of neighborhood business where the current sort of state-owned staging area parcel is. And what we're looking at is sort of, the future zoning context here. This is sort of, we're looking at potentially sort of mixed use artisan zoning here, and then mixed use light industrial commercial here, sort of abutting this area.
Isn't that a little misleading somewhat, though, to have the park AAA zone?
It's actually pretty common across all sort of US zoning. They tend to sort of originally zoning sort of started with like, the restrictions. So AAA residence is sort of the most restrictive zoning. And a lot of parks are actually zoned that way. Going forward, I think it's increasingly common for parks to be zoned as open space, but it's sort of an artifact of sort of.
No, but the reason I'm mentioning that is because it's the park on itself. All the properties across the street from it surrounding are all, I believe, probably C zone because they're all multifamily smaller lots.
Yeah. So it's B res just across the Seaview Ave. It's B residence. So you're right. It's sort of, the zone does shift sort of along the parks line. So I think it's really just a AAA residence sort of serves both as an open space sort of district by proxy, but also, as a sort of low density residential district as well. So I don't know if the city has any sort of experience with the sort of the history of that district for Norwalk, but that's sort of what we'd assume from other cities we work in, that it's used in that way.
Zoe, I'm wondering if for purposes of clarity for the public, when we're meeting next week, if it wouldn't make sense to have maybe a AAA / open space or AAA / park in order to clarify it for the public.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just exclude AAA and just call it park for the purposes of the public, or
Yeah.
it's likely to devolve into a whole other conversation. Legal counsels who specialize in zoning often recommend residential AAA because it's a foolproof way to restrict use. Just a little bit more commentary on what Zoe was describing, but I don't know, Steve, has this come up in other planning initiatives before?
No, we talked with the consultant that's doing the overall zoning, and maybe we're going to make a park zone or an open, we might do something like that, but.
Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, we can definitely make that adjustment to sort of clarify for the public moving forward, because it is a little confusing to have a park zoned residential when people are looking at it as a park. Okay, so that's sort of the context that we're looking at going forward. So sort of residential flanking it on either sides, and then sort of more mixed use and industrial on the other side of Water Street.
Hey, I've got a quick question. This is John.
Yeah.
The section that's marked off in blank.
I think you just muted yourself. You can unmute again.
Oh, I apologize. The area that's been left blank, basically the Water Street side, and
I think you muted yourself again, John.
that's so weird. I don't know how that's doing that. I'm not touching anything. Anyway, hopefully it doesn't happen again. I apologize. The area marked blank, not colored, broader Marina District, the other side of Water Street. So that area in question is being recommended or being planned to be a Marina District? And if so, what are the restrictions as far as development residential would not be allowed?
So I think that's a sort of,
No, there you go.
so this is the current zoning, right? And then the reason it's sort of blanked out in the upcoming slide is just because we're actively right now, this group is working through, what that zoning might become. So the next sort of slide after this, we'll start to talk about the sort of different scenarios, but our expectation is that this area as a whole may have some variation within it in terms of how the zoning treats different sort of sub areas, but that it's really anchored by the Marina District. So that's part of what's driving the sort of broader land use conversation.
Yeah,
in this
I think
area.
the underlying assumptions is, the planning team is all for marina uses and water dependent uses. The question is, are there other uses in specific areas in those parcels that might be allowed to incentivize landowners to either augment, increase, or add marine uses maybe that aren't there, or as a strategy to perpetuate kind of an active waterfront there. So that's the kind of conceptual framework for the what if that somebody's going to get into.
Right. Oh, it sounds like I jumped ahead. Yeah, I'm just like I was hoping keep the conversation open where perhaps a separation on Water Street. I think it's such an important part of South Norwalk and one of the the areas that'll affect Norwalk as a whole the most.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we
Okay.
tried a
Absolutely.
couple of things, so let us know what you think, and don't
Yeah.
get
Okay.
mad at us. Okay.
No problem. So please proceed. Please proceed.
Okay, so the first one that I'll show you is kind of, in a sense, the most conservative. It's the most consistent with what's there right now and the zoning that's there right now. So this one would be basically looking at maximizing the area that's zoned with the current regulations of the Marine Commercial District. So be looking at sort of a small expansion here to the area that's currently zoned C residence, but that is used for marina uses currently. So the C residence would shrink to only align with where there's currently housing. We would have sort of the small section here that's currently part of the Washington Street Design District would become also marine commercial. And then looking at the current staging area, sort of state-owned land also becoming marine commercial. So this is kind of like max marine commercial and sort of not making a whole lot of adjustments to the sort of the DNA of the marine commercial zoning. The downside of this is that it might not incentivize a lot of investment. It might not troubleshoot some of the sort of emerging concerns or investment needs for the marine commercial businesses, because the types of uses they could, combine with their primary use might be more limited. So that'd be kind of the downside of this option. Any thoughts before I jump into the next one? I think
Zoe,
John Romano, you might have, sorry, go ahead.
I would like to echo, I like the idea of, keeping it marine incentivized and water dependent, and, if possible, creating some public access through whatever that incentivization might be.
And get rid of the wall.
Right, get rid of that stone wall. Thank you.
Yeah,
John.
the one that's right here, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's two down to the right.
I think it's
Yeah.
worth saying that the agent for public access has to be some level of redevelopment. So if this results in stasis of a certain kind without any tinkering of the existing code, there might not be the agency to think through public access concerns. But I'm just putting it out there.
Oh,
So, yeah, go ahead, John Pinto.
excuse me. Oh my.
It's a classic public meeting. So hard to manage all of the forms of communications all at once.
That marine commercial area, we have very much a shortage of dock space, obviously. if we can think in terms of incentives to do some rack storage there, like they did at Rex Marine, which is totally full. Incentivize businesses like a Marine Max to maybe expand over to additional properties to do the joint ownership or joint leasing of boats, a timeshare for a boat kind of scenario. Marine manufacturing, marine specific buildings that are put up to facilitate repairs and the like. That's what that whole area is supposed to be. And I think a lot of people that are there have been waiting for a bunch of years for zone changes to do other than what the area is specifically designed for. And if we ever attempt lose it even minutely, it's going to bring us down a slippery slope that we may not recover from, because we're going to lose that overall flavor of what Norwalk and specifically this area is all about.
I think one of the things that you're going to see in a couple of minutes is, do you incentivize those kinds of things that you're talking about, John, by allowing some other uses on upper floors? In other words, you
we
can
talked
do
about that, and and that's doable. I mean, you said bring the sandwich shop in or a restaurant that will help facilitate what's going on there. You know, something lined up on Water Street. You still have to combat the zone scenario with the flooding and getting up above the the camera requirements and all that too. And that's going to be a challenge in itself.
Well, John, discussions with DEP, they're not going to sanction any residential area in a flood zone. Not at all.
We're not talking about residential. We're talking about commercial use.
Okay. Yeah, and I think
can we how about we go through the different scenarios and then come back to the conversation? Otherwise, we're going to be here till midnight.
Sure.
I think.
Sure.
So this is, in essence, sort of looking at what it would look like to have, a little bit more of a mixture of uses allowed on these sites, with that mix really being prioritized for the parts that face on Water Street, and really using that to drive investment into the marine commercial primary uses. So it would mean sort of having more of a buffer around the edges, but really still focusing that and tying that back into the sort of, primary driving use, which is the marine commercial. So this is sort of the same spirit, the same motivator, but sort of looking at it more in terms of what development incentives can we provide that would help people to do that, sort of to focus in on that primary use. And then the last version, this is sort of a very small tweak, is really just focused on this slot here. So if you see in the previous one, this is sort of looking at that as marine commercial. This one would look at that instead as heavy industrial public services. So that's sort of as an overflow potentially to for the operational needs of the various public services that are along the waterfront now. So that's the wastewater treatment plant, public works, the waste transfer station, and sort of thinking of this as a sort of a spot that would be operationally valuable to them. But that we could still achieve some sort of public realm improvements and sort of line this street here with a different zone, sort of tuck it away behind. So the final scenario here is to look at that sort of the state-owned parcel here as future open space to sort of carry over the sort of momentum of Betts Memorial Park and then sort of Constitution Park here to sort of carry that link all the way to the rail bridge. So these are kind of most of the variation in these last scenarios is in this little pocket, and then the other main difference is sort of, are we lining the street with a mixed use sort of development area, or are we restricting the use with the current marine commercial all the way up to Water Street? And that's it for, yeah, go ahead.
Is the state-owned parcel that's there, the open space, I know it's for the walk bridge, is that a temporary state-owned or is that a permanent state-owned? Maybe Steve knows.
I think everything is, temporary, but temporary with the walk bridge is not a temporary, it's a
Right.
long-term temporary.
Long-term.
Yeah, long-term temporary. Okay.
I think
And
the
for
city has the
businesses
right
there
of
that
first
bought-
refusal.
What's
I think
that?
I think the city has the right of first refusal on that property.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I think for the purposes of this planning process, we should assume that this is a long way down the road, but that when we get there, there will be a reasonable justification to prioritize that for some kind of use that publicly benefits the city as a whole. So that's sort of the question is that public benefit about enhancing the sort of marine commercial area as a whole? Is that about providing industrial public services, or is that about open space? All of those can be sort of construed as related to the public benefit. They're just a different angle on it. So to dive into some of the nitty gritty of this is a really complex zoning district, the current marine commercial zoning district. And the main thing that we're sort of that we dived into this to figure out is sort of, since the zone currently allows multifamily residential, allows restaurants and retail, allows offices, hotels, a bunch of other things, sort of what is preventing people from taking advantage of that land use mix? And our hunch at this point, based on the analysis we've done, is that it's a combination of two things. One is that all of these uses are special permit uses, so there's a little bit more friction and uncertainty associated with that. And then the other thing is that the parking requirements are really complex. So I won't go through these word for word, but basically for each use, there's a different parking requirement and they interact with one another. So there's reductions for certain pairings of different land uses. So this is a pretty complicated puzzle for anybody to figure out. And so it would require a relatively sophisticated developer to be able to think through how to redevelop these parcels to have that broader use, to have that cross subsidy or sort of mutual support of having other land uses along Water Street. So that's kind of our initial findings in terms of the zoning, the current zoning. And then what we started to look at is different test fits on sort of typologized parcels in the current marine commercial zone. Looking at sort of slightly more progressive standards for parking and also for the lot coverage, allowing a little bit more. And our main goal here really was to think about what kind of development could go here and that could create that sort of mutually supportive relationship. So these test fits are kind of exploratory and aren't intended to sort of serve as a recommendation for what we think should go there, but rather as a way of showing what the market might sort of be able to produce given the current.
So Zoe, is anyone spoken to Deep to get their temperature? Because my understanding is that the Deep, and as Dr. Pinto pointed out the last time we spoke, has a absolute can't do scenario for housing within these areas.
If the access to the housing is above the target flood elevations, and if it's on upper levels, typically in Connecticut and other states, it's allowed. It's having housing that comes to the ground. But I think we wanted to show the steering committee and the public these scenarios first, before we dove into the kind of detailed requirements. If you go back to that comparative table, Zoe, it might be helpful to point out a couple of things before you get to the scenarios.
Sure. One of the items for the we dropped it from 0.3 typical of the market that one space unit, and then for the parking ratio also a reduction to sort of allow for more flexibility with the parking configuration. Also allowing for, there are some complementary uses, so shared parking assumed there as well. And then for the front setback and side, really the current.
For some reason, we're breaking up. We're
These
not,
here are really intended to sort of.
Zoe, I think you're breaking
things
up.
aren't coming through very clear.
Okay, let me give a try to.
You're back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I wanted to point out that these scenarios are proposing a half a story less, so 4 stories, which we thought, you wouldn't want to go any taller than that, at least in terms of our first hunch. I wanted to point that out, as well as some of the tinkering we're doing with the parking ratios.
Yeah, and you'll also see the max height here. We're sort of even bringing a little bit down from what the current zoning allows, based on the sort of typologies that we're guessing. The other thing that we wanted to highlight is that right now we're going to show you some sort of like max development test fits, but ultimately we're going to be sort of revising these with some urban design, environmental, and sort of water quality perspectives that will sort of shape what those look and feel like. But sort of some of the initial observations that we had is that the current pattern of development sort of creates these sight lines that are not really formal sight lines, but they do give you a sight line to the water, that basically align with the drive aisles for sort of the operations of the marine commercial businesses. And then that going forward, if we were to incorporate sort of resiliency best practices and bike and pedestrian infrastructure improvements, the logical place to do that would be along Water Street. And so thinking about incentivizing increased setbacks from Water Street as part of any redevelopment might be worthwhile to sort of give space for some of those resiliency and infrastructure investments to occur and be successful, and to sort of support the district overall. So this is sort of our typologized existing conditions. This isn't any one parcel, or it's more a combination of the typical narrow site that we see and the typical sort of double wide or sort of wider site that we see happening along the marine commercial. This is sort of the maximum feasible development with a setback from Water Street. That's just a 5-foot setback, retail lining that, and then surface parking that sort of has pilotier sort of supporting upper level residential. So this would require some site consolidation. But this would sort of, if you got a more aggressive developer who's sort of looking to max out the development potential of the site, this is sort of what they would most likely be looking at. This incorporates sort of the structural combinations that would, need to happen in order to combine retail, residential, and parking on a site like this, with sort of drive aisle access to the marine commercial in the rear.
And this what if proposes that you can only do these mixed use buildings within 210 feet from the back of sidewalk, the right of way of Water Street. Further in than that, it has to be 100% marine industrial, and marine industrial supportive. And I think one of the comments that John Romano made is that raising the residential up on columns, whether to accommodate parking under it or boat storage, or a combination of those things, or even boat facilities, might be an ingredient we add to this, that maybe you're only allowed to do this if you have marine industrial uses on the ground floor, for example, as a kind of carrot and stick strategy, which is that the ground floor would have to be supportive of the marine industrial. But that dimension that we're talking about from Water Street in, where you're allowed to do this, of course, would create changing dimensions of 100% marine industrial, because that's a wedge-shaped kind of zoning area. And so we took the kind of average depth of the parcels to do this, to do these scenarios. But you'll see that at 4 stories, you get 3 stories of residential, or it could be commercial over marine industrial and or retail on the ground floor, or parking or boat storage.
And then if you kind of take that same typology and sort of shrink it to the typical wider parcel, this is sort of the, logical extension of that same set of parameters. And then finally, if you look at the narrower sites, it would be a sort of a single long skinny building going towards the water side of the parcel.
Yeah, Tim, I don't think I ever brought up anything that included apartments. What I did relate to in terms of incentivizing was to put in more marine related buildings and maybe chop down the parking requirements. And as you discussed and suggested, maybe have a support store in there that would sell sandwiches or be a breakfast place or something people who are walking along the water could, or lived in a neighborhood could avail themselves to. But I never brought up apartments.
Yeah, the existing zoning with special permit allows apartments. And our idea was to put that in a much tighter box to say, you can't do that everywhere on the site. You can only do it close to Water Street, and you can only do it if you do those supportive marine industrial uses and limited retail on the ground floor. So we to give more directionality to where that can go. The existing zoning, except for the planning and zoning board now that is going to be reviewing special permits, allows apartments currently, but without a kind of a dimensional restriction about where it can go. That was one of the surprising discoveries. And the planning staff asked us, well, if it's allowed already, why hasn't anyone pulled the trigger on it? And it might be, again, the kind of parking ratio complexities, or getting the parking to work on the site.
Well, that's part of it, but also it is limited. They can't, where some of these sites are, that maybe if on a special permit, they could put 12 to 18 units, not 100. They're looking for 100 plus in some cases. So, I mean, that changes the dynamic really out of proportion. And then the views from across the way, from the other side of Water Street, it's gonna block a lot of those views if those are high-rise buildings.
Yeah, they're not. They're only 4 stories.
Yeah.
I think your point is well taken. I mean, I know that in our previous conversations, we hadn't discussed like residential as a primary driver here. I think the reality is that if we're thinking about reinvestment in these parcels and sort of reinvestment specifically in the marine commercial, that given sort of the resiliency constraints, given them sort of the realities of the market pressures and sort of people's ability to reinvest in their properties, having some flexibility to sort of do complementary development, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to do it. It doesn't mean that it's sort of the only solution for these parcels, but opening that up as a way that people can strategize how to sort of create a thriving marine industrial business in this area is sort of, we thought it was an idea worth exploring, to sort of say, what would it take to sort of come up with a sort of a development typology that could serve in a sense as a sort of a financial engine to sort of sustain reinvestment in this district, especially given the resiliency challenges that are coming and the sort of the persistent flooding that sort of creates a really high maintenance burden for these businesses. So it's sort of, that's sort of the spirit of this question, is sort of thinking, what can this development do for the existing primary uses?
So is that part of the trade-off? Instead of have flooded apartments, have cars?
No, I
flooded?
think, John, we could, the zoning code could be designed so that you can only do this if you do X. It's an if then, right? So if you invest X in the marina, you can do this. Or if you add additional marina capacity, then you can, like, you could tie the right to do this to very targeted improvements to the marina facilities that you can't do if the property sits fallow. So, this might not be quite the recipe, but is this valuable enough to the market or to a landowner that this would incentivize them to make an investment in the marina itself, or add docks, or add capacity? That's the question.
Okay. So you're gonna have to do one to get the other.
Absolutely. This is not this is like, I think if there's some appetite for this, the as of right zoning would have those levers built into it from the get-go. In other words, if you, and we would construct the logics with this group because you understand the economics of the marina so well. If you do X, then you can do Y. If you don't, then you don't have the right to do this. And that's what's worth considering, which is, are there investments that a property owner would make in the marina itself if this generated some revenue?
Yeah,
Another thing, yeah, go ahead, Zoe.
I was just going to say, it also ties back to, like, if we are going to think about sort of the broader sort of going inland from this district, sort of the best chance of protecting that area of Norwalk from persistent flooding is this Water Street alignment. That is sort of the only realistic sort of area in which there's an opportunity to sort of make those investments to protect those neighborhoods. And so,
Well, you can raise the grades from where the buildings are, but you're gonna, how much of a change in access can you make on the access into the property? Isn't that water gonna flow in that way anyway? And you don't have the ability as it stands right now to pump out or bring that water elsewhere. Otherwise, we would have solved the flooding problem by now. So.
yeah, I mean, I think it's,
Where this is different from what I think others may have been envisioning for a while is that at least the buildings with apartments that are street-wide wise rather than water.
That's right. And I think that's important to this concept, which is that it suddenly doesn't mean that these sites get fully redeveloped. There's a narrow zone along Water Street that has to be supportive of then the water side with a high level of specificity.
Well, the properties that it seems like we're illustrating, like Rex Marine and Marine Max, those properties are pretty much to the max in terms of overall marine use. Anyway, the ones that we're changing all of these rules for that larger piece where there's 7 or 8 marine users now, and that property can stand some more marine use development. And then moving down to where the property that the state just acquired from Fowler and the property next door owned by DiNardo, this will, and those properties are not developed really.
yeah, and I think to your point, I think it would really, the people that would take advantage of this are the people whose businesses right now have some sort of hole to plug, or like have some way in which they'd like to sort of reinvest. And this would give them sort of the opportunity to do that. But businesses that have already maxed out their site and don't have any need for additional development, their business is already thriving, it's already sort of healthy. They might choose not to sort of pursue this, and that would be completely fine, you know?
Yeah, we would make the existing use, the zoning would be written so that existing units would remain conforming, right? So this would be there would be optionality here. The way that through the special permit path, you can do those other uses too. So you can design the code so that thriving businesses that are using every square inch of their parcel are still are you know, even with new zoning, don't fall into a kind of non-conforming category.
So I think I'll just flip through to the end here. That's really it for this sort of broader district. I think we've covered a lot of the sort of key concerns and sort of questions around this. Is there anything else you guys want to share before we jump into the next area?
Zoe,
Yeah.
just out of curiosity, what are the depths of these, the average depths of the properties from Water Street to the river?
I don't know offhand, actually.
I can hazard a guess. They're probably
I-
600 feet deep.
Yeah. I have some
Um,
numbers that I could share on that if you want, Lou.
Yeah. We took a kind of average, we took an average depth between the shallow ones and the deep ones and created a kind of fictional parcel. So nobody thought we were doing a master plan on their parcel.
Right.
But I think we landed on, are those 240 feet from the back of sidewalk? Zoe, remind me where we finally landed and how
Yes.
deep the yellow stuff happens.
Yes, that's correct. It's basically, it's 237 from the property line with the sidewalk. So these, you can kind of see here, these sort of visually look like about a third of the parcel, a little
Right.
over a third of the parcel. So we're sort of looking at roughly 600 foot.
And we picked that dimension because we were making sure that if you raise those buildings on stilts, you could get normal parking layouts to work and business depths that seemed appropriate. We didn't want to cheat it so narrow that, so it seemed like a good dimension to make development feasible, while still leaving plenty of space on the water side for, asphalt, one-story storage buildings and that kind of thing. One of the things we might think about doing is requiring a higher floor to floor in this development model, to make it more attractive for marina uses on the ground floor. We've got it at 20 feet now, but we might make it taller.
I just did some quick GIS measuring, and then like the north end up towards the bridge, it's close to that 250 range, but on the southern end, it's probably close to 800. So, as you go south, it gets deeper.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But Zoe, I think we'll come back to this because we've got some other ground to cover, and maybe we can circle back to this during the Q&A at the end.
Can I just ask one more thing of either Zoe or Tim?
Mhm.
How do you kind of reconcile the resiliency and environmental principles when you have building lots that are 90 and 95% built and basically, with impervious surfaces?
It's a very good question that came up in a meeting we had with the city team. I think one of the questions is, as part of the redevelopment scenarios, is there a pervious zone right along the water that can capture stormwater before it gets into the harbor? And what does that look like from a design and engineering standpoint? Is that a crushed shell surface with subsurface cisterns that redirect stormwater into some other system? Marinas are tough because they require a lot of tarmac to deal with boat storage and boat operations. And so this has come up in a couple of other projects that we're doing.
Okay.
Yeah, I
I mean, I
think
know it's not an easy question, but it's just something I think we should think about.
Yeah, I think it's, pervious where possible. And when it's impervious, building in some sort of filtration and sort of treatment mechanism so that we're not just getting, direct runoff of pollutants into the water. So I think it's, as we sort of zero in on sort of the land use scenario that we're sort of describing for each of these areas, the sort of the environmental and stormwater management and water quality regulations will sort of be woven into each of those different land use scenarios, because they sort of, it's related to the operations, it's related to the sort of the use of the parcel as well. What thing is going to ultimately be best for water quality?
If we were in a climate that didn't snow, there's all kinds of interesting pervious surfaces that you could use that would be marina compatible. But unfortunately, it snows in Norwalk and snow plows are necessary. So it complicates the solutions for that ground surface. It's an excellent question, though.
Yeah, and one that we'll definitely make some time to sort of consider in detail, probably as a follow-up to the public meeting, that'll be when we'll kind of start to dive into some of those more detailed considerations around environmental regulations and stormwater and water quality, so that we're kind of folding that into the zoning recommendations. So in the interest of time, I'm going to jump into the next area. We put that one first because we figured it was going to be the one that we all needed to discuss in most detail. But there is lots of other parts of the waterfront, so we don't want to shortchange them. So the Washington Street and Oyster Shell Park Waterfront District is really just, predominantly public oriented. And the main sort of question here that we had is what can we do with the sort of land use policy to help activate the ground floor spaces that face the water and create a more kind of dynamic, cohesive public experience moving from Washington Street north along the water towards Oyster Shell Park. So really trying to stitch all that together and help activate it. And some of the sort of public comments that we got really, not surprisingly, were mostly about public access. So thinking about the Maritime Aquarium, how to incorporate public access there. That's something that the Redevelopment Authority is actively working on as part of the Sono Wharf Public Access Framework. And then, also looking at, this sort of comment about, wanting to have this be kind of like a top flight retail and dining destination. This is a great spot. What can we do to sort of help encourage that kind of retail environment? And finally, kind of, really wanting to prioritize public access. So that's kind of the thrust of, what the public, wanted to point out in this. And then currently, these are kind of mixed use, very customized design districts. So the Washington Street Design District kind of goes up to the rail line here, and then and kind of extends over here. And then the Reed Putnam Design District sort of encompasses the Oyster Shell Park and sort of portion of the mixed use development here as well. In terms of the sort of future zoning context, we're looking at really, for the most part, a mixed use artisan kind of land use context. And then this is parkland. So again, using that AAA residence, we'll update that labeling for the public meeting. And then across the way, it's a mixture of neighborhood business, industrial and residential. So the first scenario that we had is really pretty much an as is, sort of preserve the existing sort of framework, which is, mixed use, on the sort of upland side, and then public institutional to align with where the aquarium is currently, and, open space, surrounding it. So this is sort of the sort of conservative, like it's working pretty well, don't mess with a good thing scenario. The next one is to basically introduce a little bit more land use flexibility for these, the mixed use development to allow for artisan industrial on the ground floor. So that's things like, let's say a jeweler or sort of a fine leather sort of worker. It's sort of things that are a little bit more in the retail environment. They work well with retail, they work well with restaurants, but they are in some cases more able to sort of survive in an area that doesn't have a ton of foot traffic, or an area that has more intermittent sort of use.
Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is John. I need to step off to another meeting, but just wanted to say thank you. And Steve, if you don't mind giving me an update on what was said after I left, that would be great.
Thanks, John.
Thank you all. Good
Appreciate
night.
your time. Okay, so those are really the two scenarios that we have to share for this one. So it's really just, do we think that the current mixed use sort of design districts that are in operation in the district now are sort of doing their job, don't need to be tinkered with, or do we want to see sort of increased land use flexibility, in particular for the ground floors of those existing developments? Any thoughts on that before jumping to the next one? So it's sort of a less controversial question.
Yeah, I agree.
Overall, aren't those buildings fairly new and existing, and they have retail and the like? You're not changing it really. It's pretty much what it is now.
Yeah, I think it would. Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say that the ground floor commercial spaces have been having a tough time. I know that they've been trying to keep restaurants and any kind of retail in there has been very hard.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it would be less about redevelopment here and more about how can the existing buildings and the existing sort of infrastructure, existing design, what can we do to help give them the flexibility to sort of make their developments continue to sort of work over the long term. There's all over the country, people are having trouble with retail. It's a really tough environment in general. And so providing a little bit of flexibility to sort of be creative about their ground floor strategy is really all we would be trying to incentivize there, not looking to tear those buildings down and sort of bring something different there.
Well, the view across the river isn't particularly interesting if you think about it.
Yes, that's a fair point. You're in a lovely space, but your view is maybe a little bit lackluster.
Right.
Okay, well, in the interest of time, I'll keep moving here because we have some other ones to talk through. So for this area, the sort of the core question that we were interested in here is really about the transition from heavy industrial into the CBD. What can we do to sort of make that a more managed transition, less extreme, and having more compatible land uses adjacent to one another? So how can we kind of create that sort of spectrum so that there's a little bit more of a buffer there? And in this case, there's a lot of barriers, both the sort of topographic barriers and the rail barriers that sort of form natural transition times. So here we have some of the public comment. I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to sort of jump into the next one. A lot of this was around public access, which is sort of particularly challenging in this area. The current zoning is almost exclusively heavy industrial with a little sort of tad bit of CBD in this area. And then the future zoning context we're really looking at for throughout the CBD and the sort of core commercial areas, we're looking at a mixed use artisan, sort of again, for the same reason, providing that flexibility for ground floors to sort of evolve. And there is this little sliver of D residence here, which is sort of part of the puzzle of this area. So the first scenario is sort of retaining maximum industrial flexibility. So heavy industrial, mixed use, heavy industrial and commercial, and then mixed use light industrial and commercial for the areas that are closest to CBD and residential. The second one is really sort of making a more swift land use transition from the heavy industrial along the waterfront to more of a mixed use artisan in the uplands and neighborhood business in the areas that have most contact with the CBD and the residential areas. And we have a couple of test fits here for this sort of these two little fingers that come into the residential areas. The main sort of these two areas currently are zoned heavy industrial. And so the sort of dimensional requirements for the existing zoning are a little bit out of sync with, other development types. In terms of setback, there's a really heavy front setback, 35 feet, which is really extreme for these small parcels. And then the side setback is also kind of heavy if you think about multi-story uses. So a little bit of a dimensional friction there. So this is sort of this for site A, an example of what kind of a residential building would look like on that site. We also looked at, for the smaller sites, looking at most of these are sort of lot sizes that were originally residential lot sizes. And so if they are to remain industrial, they would likely remain in their current condition with the sort of building in the rear, operations yard in the front. If they were developed as residential, it would be inverted, sort of residential in front, parking in the rear. And these would be basically 6-pack test fits, so 6-unit buildings that would be really in sync with the scale of residential around them. So what we're looking at here is sort of providing the flexibility for people to redevelop these as residential or retain them as the current industrial businesses. The current industrial businesses are not really compatible with mixed use residential industrial. They really would be one or the other. So that's kind of the history of this district, and this would be sort of allowing it to remain in that way, but having dimensional requirements that match that. That's the comparison there. Any thoughts on that before moving to the next one? No? Okay. So this this area is, the primary question here is really about making a more cohesive and connected experience. There's sort of a big disjoint kind of coming around the back of Mill Hill Park. And also just thinking more so about sort of the connection to the water from East Avenue. Again, in the interest of time, I'm gonna sort of jump past this. It's pretty consistent themes that we're seeing throughout the public comment, looking at public access, looking at dredging and sort of some of those key infrastructure questions.
Zoe, one thing I'd just like to
Excuse me,
mention.
Zoe, I'm sorry, John Pinto. Who was this a public comment as far as dredging in that particular area?
Yes, what's on these slides is all coming directly from public comment. So these were things that were submitted on the social pinpoint interactive mapping, or things that were submitted on physical maps that we had throughout some of the sort of institutions in Norwalk.
Because that area that is indicated on that map is currently, I guess, in the process of being dredged. I think is that around there, the O&G area?
So
it's
a little
further
bit,
south. Yeah.
South of, so ONG is right here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right.
And then it's sort of in this sort of swing in the river before it.
That's kind of interesting because that's the area that was already dredged in the 2015 scenario that we had with dredging in the harbor. That's a CAD cell area right there.
Yeah, I recall when we visited, this was pretty, the mud and silt was right up to the surface.
Yeah, this area here was used as for confined aquatic disposal of the material that was previously dredged from the harbor and put down in that particular area in a 50-foot cavern, if you will, and then covered over.
Got it. Yeah. So I think there's any, maybe this is somebody who uses the river in this area a lot, but it's good to know that this is sort of been, has been on the radar in the past. I'm sure it will continue to be.
Is that, Zoe, precisely where the pin was dropped? Or more or less?
More or less, yeah. I think, Gabriel, if you want to, I don't know if you recall the specifics of that.
That's okay. We can check later because that, if you look at an aerial map, that's mostly kind of tidal flats these days, and so it maybe the pin was in a different place, or
rowing club that's right here. It may just complicate their like docking sequence. That's my best guess of who might be sensitive to this particular area.
Let me see. Where's the I-95 bridge? As far is that
right on the left here?
Over here. Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, all right. Yes. No, that's not the CAD cell area. The CAD cell area is farther south.
It's farther south, right?
Yeah.
Right, John. Yeah.
There might have been some interest from someone to build additional recreational marina docks there, and that's why they wanted it to be dredged. I kind of recall that as a general comment.
Yeah, that sounds feasible. There's residential development right here, so there's sort of a logical like waterfront connection here that maybe could be made.
Zoe,
yes.
if I may, this is
Tammy. Sorry, go ahead.
I think one of the interesting things on this upper part of the river, and somebody just alluded to the rowing clubs, there's a very successful partnership with King Industries and Maritime Rowing Club, which got displaced from Goldstein Place, and they're used to on the north side of the river, the west side of the river. And then on the east side of the river, there were two rowing clubs there, and I'm not sure if they are still there, but the potential to get marine dependent use, and a rowing club is a water dependent use, and using these facilities or these properties that are not 100% maximized. And I think that we want to think about encouraging things like that if we're trying to have this water dependent use. And maybe that's where some dredging comes in up there too, but it's just something to keep in mind that there have been a couple of successful ventures going on here. And I don't know if they're on the books with the city, but I think it's something that we should think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that there's a couple of properties here that certainly would be nice locations for it. And there's definitely been a really great partnership already, with some of the heavy industrial King Industries and, the O&G also is sort of has that relationship with the boat club. So I think it's the mixture has sort of been proven, even though it might be a little bit unconventional, and it's certainly an asset to the city. So we'll definitely look at opportunities to fold that in.
Right. It also just brings more people down to the waterfront in a good way.
Yeah.
Kenny, I don't know how many, Joey, how many actual, I think it was like 2 or 3 rowing clubs that we had up in that area up there.
Yeah, 3.
Yeah. So there's one one that's right here.
That's right.
And then there is one that you can
That's
see
right
the sort
there.
of curved docks right here.
Right.
And then historically, there's also been another one that's sort of further down south.
Right. They were the ones that were displaced.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
On the east side, there was the CBC Rowing Club and the Norwalk River Rowing Club.
Yes.
And I think Norwalk River Rowing might be disbanded, but I think CBC is still in business.
So it's my understanding that on the west side of the river is CT Boat Club and Maritime River Rowing.
Right.
And then on the east side, over closer to O&G, is Norwalk River Rowing, Fairfield University, and Wilton High School Rowing. So there's quite a few.
Okay.
So just in the interest of time, I think that's a really great point, Tammy. Thanks for bringing it up, and we'll definitely be sure to circle back. So the current zoning for this area is East Avenue Village District along East Ave, and then CBD or CBD water sort of on the waterfront as it sort of curves around here. And this sort of coincides a little bit with topography as well. Future zoning conduct similar to the others, we're looking at sort of a mixed use artisan setting for this, so allowing that ground floor flexibility. And sort of the scenarios that we have here are, the first one is sort of conservative, which is really, allowing both the East Ave commercial and the CBD to sort of transition to the mixed use artisan, like what we're intending to have around it, but retaining the heavy industrial in the area where O&G is currently. This would allow for that to continue to be sort of an economic engine for heavier industrial uses in a way that's sort of tucked away. Alternatively, we could look at this as mixed use light industrial commercial. So this could be like, for instance, labs or R&D facilities, things that are a little bit more kind of low impact, but that still would require those larger parcel sizes and might want to have a little bit of sort of the physical sort of connections here that you see in terms of the waterfront and open space. And then we'd sort of be acknowledging a sort of future public access potential in the scenario in which it's light industrial commercial. If it continues to be heavy industrial, it's probably not realistic to have public access along the waterfront. That's it for this this area. Any thoughts on that before we jump into the next one?
I think the only issue, Zoe, now that I think about it relative to Divine across that narrow dimension of the harbor, is that might be the one place where there's conflict, where the conflict of public access and barges might get a little bit too uncomfortable. Something that's worth looking at on our team. Because that's precisely where the barges set up there. So it might, we might have to keep public access
Set back a little bit. Or
Yes.
it could be public access on the land side, but maybe not public access for vessels there, just because of the conflict with the industrial across. That I think is, yeah, accurate. Yeah.
As it is, you have a passage of vessels from the Norwalk Yacht Club, which is, further north of that.
Already squeezing by, right?
Yeah, right in here. Yeah. And when you have a couple of barges in that area, it gets pretty tight.
Yeah, I'd imagine. Yeah. Okay, so those are the two for this. I think we can make that adjustment to sort of be more realistic about where the public access might actually get aligned, and also making a note about it not being water access, but more so path access. So this last area is what I've sort of been calling like a mini industrial marina district. So there's already, you can kind of see here 3 different marinas or boat clubs. And then there's the sort of health tech, the health office building here. So here it's really about how can we incentivize the continued development of a mutually beneficial mix of the water dependent commercial that's there already, the light industrial R&D and healthcare facilities that are also represented here, but do so in a way that's sort of more respectful and enhances the residential neighborhoods that are immediately surrounding them. A lot of sort of, there's a little bit of a public history here around environmental impact, and also interest in sort of completing that missing loop in the trail and looking at sort of more contextually sensitive redevelopment. The current zoning is heavy industrial for this little pocket, neighborhood business for this pocket, a little sliver of B residence, which is really just a leftover from the highway area, and then East Ave Village District extends down to these ones here.
Wait, can you go back to the last slide?
This one?
Sorry, Zoe.
Yeah. Previous to this one?
Now the slide before, I think.
This one?
Yep. So you've got the medical building.
Mhm.
Next door to that, heading south, is a private club. That's the St. Anne's Club.
Mhm.
And that's that marina.
Yeah.
And you're showing pretty large public access there.
This is an existing link here that's in front of St. Anne's. That's the sort of a boardwalk before you go onto their actual docks.
Yep.
And there's the same sort of approach here. So these are all basically a public esplanade boardwalk, and then sort of limited access to get then to the boats beyond it. So most of this is actually built already, but there's just a couple of missing links. So the sort of coming around the health office building, that's a missing link. And then coming underneath the I-95 bridge is also sort of a missing link.
Well, that area right there, the commission has been looking at as again, another area for public access, because you can actually modify that area to even have a boat launch of some sort in that particular area, because it's right.
And
right
that's sort of crook here.
No, to the right, right under,
Just to the north of the bridge, you're saying, right, John?
right. Well, where the marina is, where the St. Anne's Marina is, just south of that, right there. Yeah, right there. Right there. Yeah. That area could be developed very nicely for easily public access for boat launches or whatever. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So with that in mind, sort of this will continue to be B residents sort of surrounding the majority of this area. And so the thought here is that the first is just, leave it the way it is. It's working fine. That would be heavy industrial, neighborhood business, and the mixed use light industrial commercial, which is the most aligned with the current health office building. Alternatively, we could look at mixed use light industrial commercial, sort of flanking it, and then rezoning this area right around the bridge for marine commercial, to recognize that that's really what's there now is marine commercial. And that's it for this sort of section. Any thoughts on these two scenarios?
That by that medical building in the river, the water is really low there. If there were to be anything, it would have to be seriously dredged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very appealing site, like visually, and that it's a large stretch of sort of riverfront, but it does have, like you said, very shallow waters, so not ideal for public access, or water, not ideal for boating.
I think it's a great idea to continue the CAM boardwalk. Can it go under 95 there? Or does it have to come up on Hendricks Place?
I don't know the technical details, but there's a lot of different solutions I've seen, for going under bridges. I think it'll depend on sort of the DOT and also on the sort of specifics of the bridge, how it's constructed.
Yeah, I think DOT might have some kind of regulation that you can't have something going under their bridge. Is that right? Do you want to guys know?
Yes, they do. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I think I'm going to jump into the last bit, which is really just to give you guys a feel for how we're imagining the public meeting will go, and sort of the subsequent public feedback. So first, just as sort of an awareness, We are expecting to do translation for key materials into Spanish. As you can see here, sort of the orange dots, the area immediately around our study area has a really significant Hispanic population. And so we want to make sure that they can be part of the process and share their input. You can see that this is a pretty diverse sort of immediately around our study areas is quite a diverse range of people. So we're really hoping to kind of reach a broad swath of folks to get input. So the public meeting itself, our effort is sort of twofold. The first is just informational, sort of bringing people up to speed on what we've been doing and sort of the analysis, but then more importantly to sort of listen and learn from them. So we're looking at the sort of what their top issues are, getting a sense of some of those sort of in a summary form, getting their feedback on sort of the character areas and transition zones, based on sort of basically what we shared with you the last steering committee meeting. And then related to the content that we shared this steering committee meeting, getting their input on these land use scenarios that we shared with you. We'll be refining them between now and then, but basically to sort of get their thoughts on which they think is a better outcome for the city of the scenarios that we have. So the tools that we have on Zoom, there's live polling. So this is something that allows us to get quick input on sort of multiple choice questions. So we expect to use that to talk about the scenarios to get a quick sense of kind of the people in the meeting. What do they want? What are they most drawn to? We can also use Moreau to sort of get comments on like specific transition areas and sort of their feedback on the sort of spatial aspects of it. We can use sort of surveys to gather input and sort of be able to summarize it in a pretty condensed way. We can pair that with a bunch of different, tools. We can also do a physical kind of comment cards to get input on these scenarios. This is something that's really useful to sort of reach people in a more physical capacity. And then finally, social pinpoint, which is what we used in the first phase of the project. We're expecting to update that to include the scenarios that we just showed you, so that people can sort of provide their input on the scenarios directly in social pinpoint and the sort of the mapping environment where they can zoom in and out. So I'll kind of leave that there. Any sort of, for the public meeting format, any sort of concerns or things that you think we should be sort of watching out for relative to kind of getting input on top issues, character areas and transition zones, or the land use scenarios? Okay. For the sort of following up from the meeting, we expect to do some more of the sort of leaving comment cards and sort of encouraging people to participate in the form of digital survey and or social pinpoint mapping tool. Are there any kind of thoughts you have about specific populations that live in and around the study area, or ideas of places that we can go to kind of connect with people and sort of reach a broader audience over the course of the next couple months?
So where will the comment cards be available?
So I think we'd probably start with the same place that we put the physical maps. So this first round of engagement, we had physical maps in a couple of sort of institutional places. So the libraries, City Hall, and there was also some discussion with potentially engaging with schools. That didn't work out for the first round of engagement, but we might sort of explore that for subsequent engagement. But it's generally kind of trying to find some level of institutional partner that can sort of help us with keeping track of it and getting all the information back to us.
And will they also be bilingual?
Yes, the comment cards would definitely be bilingual, because I think we're most likely to reach people who are not English speaking, or for whom English is not their primary language, through the physical outreach more so than our digital outreach. That's been our experience in the past.
Well, there are a couple of larger churches in town that have significant Hispanic populations that you might consider.
Yeah, that would be great. If you have any particular ones in mind, if you can send them to Laura or the city team, that'd be really useful.
Zoe,
Okay.
in a city our size, what sort of participation from the public do you see in general? How many people?
It varies really widely. I mean, a lot of it has to do with, whether this is something that's top of mind for people. If we're doing a, planning effort on something that's really controversial, we'll see a lot more participation. So I expect that we'll have a couple of sort of interest groups that are really active in this, but that, more broadly, I think it'll take a little bit of nudging to get people invested enough to sort of provide public comment. It's a little bit easier when it's like a park or, something that's sort of a more obvious immediate impact. Land use doesn't tend to get people super excited.
Right.
Zoe, have you contacted, for example, commodores of the various marinas in the area, members like, for example, St. Anne's Club, president of the club, just to get some feedback from those people who actually use the harbor?
We had some initial, stakeholder meetings with a whole series of just about all of the sort of boat club owners or operators, representatives from each. But I think that this would be a great time to sort of reach back out and say, all right, we're in the next phase. We'd love to hear from you. This is what we have.
I think so. Yeah, you start from the South Norfolk Boat Club and work actually even from the Norfolk Yacht Club and work our way sort of upstream.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the boat club members should, they generally have a boat from small to large.
Just so everyone's aware, any marketing that of the public feedback or basically anytime there's an update in the study. So like when we had the social pinpoint map, as I've been sending out invites to the January 18th meeting, anytime that goes out to everyone who we interviewed. So that includes, I think, most of the boat clubs or yacht clubs in town. And we encourage them to share with their membership. So that's allowed and we encourage it, but just in case they don't hear it from me enough, I think anyone in this group who wants to encourage them also should definitely do so.
Okay, Zoe, one thing came to mind. Just had a little flash, and it was something that Tammy brought up at our last call, or maybe the last two calls. Is it the need for parking for support system for some of the businesses on the west side of Water Street who have agreements with some of the places there now.
Right, I remember that coming up last time, yeah.
Has that been plugged in anywhere in terms of an overall need?
We have,
go ahead. Yeah, I think how that's handled on private property in terms of zoning is a little bit difficult, John, to figure out. I mean, it suggests other kinds of strategies that have to do with, available parking spaces for all of those businesses along the kind of Washington Street area there and how that's kind of marketed and managed. But our eye is really on tweaks to the zoning and how you include requirements for uses. Parking for people offsite gets a little bit complicated in terms of private property. But
no, I get that, but that's also going to affect those existing businesses that are there, especially that it will null and void whatever agreements they have should somebody apply for a zoning permit to do something else.
Yeah,
I think so. I think the way that's most likely to sort of fold into our process is, so this is sort of one piece of the puzzle, right? But the city is doing a sort of a rezoning more generally. And part of that, they're looking at parking ratios and sort of, I think we can take a look at, the businesses that are there, how do they, what are the current requirements? Are they using, this sort of adjacent properties as a way to increase their parking inventory beyond the requirements, in which case I think it's really a private business choice on their part. If they're using it to sort of meet their base zoning requirements, then that's maybe something that we can sort of think about in terms of the updated zoning districts that they would be a part of.
Just wanted to bring it up because Tammy had brought it up before, and I just
Yeah, no, it's a great point. There's parking is certainly like a ripple effect situation. You know, it's not an independent. It doesn't, when you change one thing, it sort of ripples through the system. So it's worth bringing up again. We'll definitely keep an eye on it. So I think we are just a few minutes over time. I know we have to open up for public comment. Before we do that, I just want to flag that for the public meeting, the UTL team will be sort of running the meeting, facilitating, but we do expect to go into some breakout rooms as sort of for the latter portion of the meeting to allow for some more organic discussion with participants. And it's always great to have steering committee members there as sort of additional sort of facilitators, or to sort of ask follow-up questions, since you're more sort of familiar with the sort of subtleties of the local sort of landscape. So we would love to have you guys join us for the public meeting, and if possible, also sort of participate as, you know, a mixture of kind of a little bit of like note taking and sort of, helping sort of keep the conversation lively with the participants that
Are you
show
going to
up
do
join
that?
us.
Will those breakouts be by zones, such as you have indicated?
So they'll most likely be sort of a little bit more multi-purpose. So the way that the technology is set up, you basically subdivide everybody into a certain number of groups. It's difficult to hand pick who goes where. We can do it where needed, but it's a little difficult to have people articulate a preference for where they go and then direct them there live during the meeting because of how the sort of back end of the meeting setup works. But we can certainly, for each of the groups, when we get into the breakout group, we can sort of take stock for the people that are participating, which areas they're most interested in talking about, and then focus our conversation.
But what would be the group topics or the group areas that how is that breakout going to look?
Yeah, so they would basically be set up with the most likely the prompts would be associated with the 5 different sort of clusters that we went through today.
Right,
So
okay, that's what I was
sort of
expecting. Yeah.
Yeah, so we basically we'd say, these are the 5 areas that we're, looking to discuss with you, and the scenarios for each, kind of ask people which one they want to start with, and just kind of get some thoughts about those different areas.
I think John's question is, would each breakout be a different area, or would each group be allowed to talk about any of the 5, and they could kind of,
Yeah, basically.
Each
Yeah.
group would be allowed to talk
which
about
makes
any of
more
the
sense,
5.
I think, don't you think, John? That you
Yes.
would, yeah, okay,
I would agree with that also, yes.
okay.
Yeah, and that's sort of, for our end, that's the easiest thing to set up, and it also gives us the flexibility to kind of, address things as they come up, address things as people have ideas about
But
different
those groups
areas.
are going to be working simultaneously or one after
Yes.
another?
Correct. Yeah. So
Simultaneously.
basically,
It's a way to break it down to a smaller number of people, so it's more conversational.
Right.
they'll all be concurrent, but you won't be able to hear, what the other people are doing. You'll be in your own kind of digital room.
Your own bowl.
It'll
Yeah.
look like this. It'll be similar to this right where we're at right now.
Okay, no, it sounds good.
And we don't have anybody from the public unless Diana, the minute taker, who's taking minutes, wants to chime in. But other than that, I think nobody else is here.
I hope
That
we
was
get
very
it.
good, Zoe. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. It's a good, nice little overview and presentation.
Yeah, I
Thank
think-
you.
Nice.
So do you know, I think unless Laura knows, I think we had over 80 people registered so far.
I was just going to ask if you had, I was going to say, I think I remembered you saying like 60 or 80. So we should get a decent number. Usually there's a little bit of attrition. People say they're going to go and a certain percentage don't show up. But yeah, what do you have the latest, Laura, on numbers?
As of Friday, we were at 80. So we'll probably, I think also these meetings are pretty common to have people sign up the day of. So it'll be interesting to see who does come and who doesn't come. And of course, it'll be available on YouTube after the fact for anyone who isn't able to attend at the time. And then we hope to have accept comments for, I think, a month or two after the live meeting. So if someone can't attend, they can watch it on YouTube and then submit their comments.
Do you resend the link, the Zoom link, like you do for us the day of the meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
And
that's good.
anytime anything's updated also. So
Great. Thanks.
it might go out on unintentionally a little bit more.
It's okay. It's better to have too many links than not enough,
Yeah.
I agree.
for me anyway.
Easier to find when it's buried only under a few hours of emails versus days.
Right.
I
try to-
I think that's it. Since we don't have any members of the public, any last thoughts before we close out and have our evenings?
Oh, good.
Okay, great. Don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything you think of in
Yeah,
between
I
now
think
and
you laid out the scenarios very well, Zoe. I like that. I like that approach that you had.
thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your continuing engagement and attention. We like our focused audience.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you're preaching to the converted, our focus is Nog Harbor. That's first and foremost.
Okay. Excellent.
Well, it's what we always need. We need some people who are just as
Into it as us.
nerding
Yeah.
out about the things we're focused on so that we make sure we get it right. So we appreciate it.
Well, great. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Thanks so
Okay.
much.
Thanks.
I see
Thanks
the
all.
evolution taking place.
Yeah, slow but bit by bit, we'll get there.
Yep.
All righty. Have a good evening, all.
Ciao.
Take care, everyone.
Good night, Zoe.